Your pressures, reclaiming peace, rest, and contentment. So Candy and I both said this was a really difficult one. Anybody else find this difficult? Stacy rolls her eyes, so I'm guessing that means yes. Do you need paper for this week? Okay, no problem. So yes, this one definitely, I was even still working on it even up to this afternoon, just really having to sit and just mull it over because it really required a lot of inward, going inward and just saying, Lord, okay, you got to show me some things. So this week we're asking the Lord to help us gain control of our schedule, create spaces within which to breathe, obey the principles of God's Sabbath, and establish boundaries based on the truth of His all-wise word. This will make your destiny come into clear focus, your worship blossom into brilliant colors, and your day amazingly bright with joy. So each day we were to take a moment and ask the Lord for discernment in these areas of our pressures, because some of these determinations can be subtle and hard to spot. And I think that's something that was reality for me, and trying to really just pinpoint some other areas that we're not even really aware of. So I hope that happened with you all as well. All right, so this week's memory verse was super easy, ladies. I gave you guys super easy, right? Yes, thank you, teacher. So, so can anybody recite it? Can everybody recite it without looking?
My yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Where do you find that?
Matthew 11:30.
Woohoo! I didn't think I had enough hearts. I'm going to find them now. I'm going to really try to give it to all you guys. That's awesome. So my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We're going to really pick that apart in a little bit. But let's move on to day 2 and talk a little bit before we do that. So if I were your enemy, I'd bog down your calendar with so many expectations you couldn't tell the difference between what's important and what's not. Everybody says amen on that, right? So why would Satan want to keep you busy? What were your eyes off the Lord? Keep your eyes off the Lord.
Which way you need to be bondage.
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 Okay. Awesome. I mean, that's not awesome, but thanks for sharing. Yes.
You don't snarl her nose.
Awesome. I'm so thanks. Well, I am.
It's not awesome that it keeps us in bondage.
Right. I'm just saying. Thank you. I'm just not going to say nothing. How's that? I'll just keep my mouth shut. I don't think it's possible. Anybody else?
I also wrote to make you believe your value is in how much you can do.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Again, that's not good, but that's good. Oh goodness. We gotta have some fun. Gotta keep it light because it's serious stuff, man. Anybody else?
Well, she said in the book that if we're busy, that's just less work. He's saving himself work.
Yes. He's not having to work so hard, is he? Allowing us to stay that busy. Anyone else? Let's see what I have written down here. Something else that I thought about too is that when we're focused on those things that are good, I'll be content in that. I'll be content in the good, but not in the best. I found that to be true in my own personal life. I'm trying to see if there's not. Anybody else? Sometimes also we can feel too overwhelmed to not want to do anything different. He wants to keep us so busy, so overwhelmed that when the Lord may say, I want you to do this or whatever, we just think, no way, I can't add another thing. There's absolutely no way. So
We're too tired to do our study.
Yeah.
Because I'll think I'll do it at night, and then 9 o'clock rolls around and I'm
exhausted.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so there was about 30 plus pressures that she described on page 134 and 135. And instead of having you name all them, again, thank you, teacher, right? I was going to have you name all of them, but yeah, anyways. Name the pressures that you struggle with the most. Then circle your greatest pressure in your life right now. And again, I know this is intimate information and things like that, but I think it's good for us to really pinpoint, to again go inward and to really pinpoint those areas in our life that we see. Sometimes, I mean, there were so many here, it's really good for us to take inventory every now and then And I think this was really a good thing for us to do that, is to read through them. Would anybody like to share some pressures that you struggle, that you found in that list?
I think just, you want your kids to be involved, but when is enough, when is enough?
I think
Struggle.
it might,
And where are some of these things even taking?
Right.
in the long run?
right, and now you think, okay, if I don't let him do this though, he's not gonna get better at it, and then we're not gonna have a chance when they get older. There's just so much pressure in sports. There is a lot of pressure in sports, and it's fun when they're younger, and then it starts getting competitive, and you think, oh, well, if I take a year off, or if I take a break, they're not gonna go anywhere with that anyway, in the end.
That's a good point. Being able to look beyond the right here and now, right? And being able to somewhat, again, take inventory to say, okay, what's our purpose in this? What is this going to produce? I think that's really that way in any of us, even things that we do personally. I know I haven't been involved, but I know there's some that are involved in sororities. There's ministries, there's different things like that we can even, look and say, okay, is this something that's producing what I was hoping for it to produce or looking forward to? So I know it's definitely something having to continuously, especially when it comes to our kids, because isn't that what, it's always hard to say no when we know they really want to do something, or they really enjoy it, or they're really good at it. Even though if we think they're not going to become an Olympian, obviously, So we had to do that one time. We literally took all of our kids out of all sports because it had become such an idol in our family. We were doing 2 and 3 sports per kid, and with our size family, it was just overwhelming to where it burned us out so bad that we just totally pulled out. And it was good. There went about 2 to 3 years there when we took a break. And Emma, of course, gets mad at me. That was during my years, Mom. She always says to me. So anyways, but she's still, she's good. So, all right, so we talked about kids. Anybody else? Any other pressures?
I think the perfect image of what you want people to think, that you've got it all together, I guess.
Yeah. And she kind of goes on that a little bit more later, towards the end, but yes, for sure.
I was talking about that last night. We had some people over, and we were standing there, and she was like, "Yeah, in the morning, we're always like, we're grabbing the kids, and we get your."
Yep. We're the perfect family. But then when someone says, "How are you?" you don't want to go, "Well, do you really want to know?"
Yeah, you offer yourself to say good. You're good. That's all. That's all the answer
We're
we all wanna
good.
hear.
We're good. We're good. I think we would stop probably asking that question. We'd go, "Well, do you really want the truth, or do you want the Jesus answer?"
That's right.
Yes, yes. So keeping up. Anybody else? Write that down. Any other pressures? I think right now, for me, it was unrealistic demands that I put on myself and other people, my kids, my husband, unrealistic demands, that's some pressures, and even unrealistic demands on myself. And really that comes from a sense of perfectionism and control. For me, the Lord has just really been showing me, which I already knew that, but I mean,
Your mom said yesterday when
Oh, Lord, I can
Garrett was
imagine.
getting mouthy and angry at the things, and she goes, "Yeah, he gets it naturally." I said, "I know, his dad is just like that." She looked at me like, "Yeah, right."
Yeah. So, definitely my pressure.
Just comes by it
Honestly, yeah.
It's kind of like me.
Something else is even being the perfect parent. We talked about our kids, but trying to, we can become so overwhelmed and feel like we've got to make sure, and not make any mistakes, and we're so fearful of what if I don't do this right, and things like that. That is a huge pressure, is putting that weight on our shoulders that we just have to have it all together and do it all right and all those types of things. So that for me is another pressure that I struggle with. And even the study, I wrote that even the study, keeping on top of that, just like you said, we can, that pressure feeling like, I know I need this. I know this is what's good and what's best, but it's still pressure, that we can put on ourselves too. Okay, well, let's move on. Can someone define slavery?
Exhausting labor or restricted freedom.
That too. Anyone else?
Good bondage.
Bondage, yes.
I didn't hear that word.
Anyone else? I also have found excessive dependence on or devotion to something. Excessive dependence on or devotion to something. A couple of those words, as I've always told you guys, words just jump out at me. So, restricted freedom, so the word restricted, and excessive dependence. So, when you think about restricted and when you think about excessive, it's usually not in a good way, right? I mean, you think negatively about those words. So when we think of slavery, and exhausting, yes, and even underline that, exhausting labor, that's definitely a negative word, exhausting. So when we think of the word slavery, it definitely has a negative connotation, as it should. Exhausting, restricted, excessive dependence onto something. So with that, go ahead and turn your page. We said the enemy's intention is always to enslave you. So you're to name 3 areas that Satan can enslave you to that are actually good things. On page 136, what were 3 areas that she said that Satan can try to enslave you to good things?
Your job,
Mm-hmm.
your ministry, and recreational hobbies.
Yes. So I want to read again on page 136. In that first paragraph, it says, nothing is so healthy and life-giving that he can't turn it into a cruel taskmaster, one that bosses you around and runs your life. Doesn't that sound like our schedule sometimes? And it's for good things, for ministry, for our family, kids, good things that God has given us, but can very easily and quickly become slavery. Can enslave us to. So this is really important. I'm so glad that she addressed this. This is a very important subject. So I hope that we all really took it in this week and continue to allow the Lord to teach us through it. Define Sabbath.
Just cease to stop.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think God instituted the Sabbath? I wanted you guys to think through that. Why do you think He instituted that?
Because people do recognize what they're doing all week long, and there's been kind of stop and think, and worship God.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else want to add to that? Kind of add to what you're saying is, what you're saying is we're so busy, so our bodies get wore out. And the Lord knows that. Our bodies get wore out. So when we take that rest, we get strengthened. It strengthens us both physically, but also emotionally and spiritually when we take that time with Him, and make sure and focus on Him. Something else that I thought about, it also, when we stop, we remember what He's delivered us from. I think that's something else the Lord wants us to do, is to stop and really think. As again, we get so busy and caught up in the schedule and all those types of things, it's easy to forget what He's done for us. So I think the Sabbath also makes us stop and remember where we were, where we came from, and what He's delivered us from. So name some specific ways that you are resting and placing margins in your life. And margins are boundaries. If you can't name any, then how can you put this into practice this week? So did you have some very specific ways that you can say you have been resting and placing margins in your life? Not this week. Okay, well, normal, I mean, of course, we're always going to have those weeks that are just crazy, but under a normal life, a normal week.
After a work week, I kind of sit back like on Saturday, and I really don't put myself on a time schedule.
That's awesome.
Just to kind of regroup and kind of do something, maybe not the whole day, but to kind of do something for myself. If it's just to watch a Hallmark movie or piddle out in the yard or something, rather than something that I have to do.
Yeah. So that's stopping of the normal routine and giving your body and your mind everything a rest.
And sometimes, I mean, if you're so exhausted from work, I mean, you just go. I mean, a lot of times, it's all I can do to get up, you know, some mornings, and it's just like you need a nap, and it's just like his way of saying, look, you need to slow down
Yes.
and take a breath.
And that's kind of what happened to me this week. It's just been project graduation and moving kids and trying to find apartments and what we do. Oh, Sunday I moved Emery. Saturday and Sunday Dave got sick, so it was me and Emery and Connor, and I was just exhausted Monday. But I didn't want to waste a sick day. I didn't want to waste a vacation day, so I go to work, go through the motions, you know, and then Wednesday, Cal's running fever, so I had to take off, and then Wednesday night, Chris has the wreck, so, you know, it's just
Constant.
yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't want to take those days off, but I had to end up taking 3, you know. So
One turned into 3.
One turned into 3.
Well, the Lord made sure you get it. Got it. Isn't that amazing how the Lord will do that?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when we're going, no, I'm good. Okay,
Okay,
well,
I'll make it.
then let me tell you you're really not. And we're going to, you know, there's something coming that's going to have to make you stop. So, yeah. For me, I am trying better about before answering a call or a text, I ask the Lord or Jeff, should I? Because, well, at least where the Lord has me right now, you know, I do a lot of counseling and I take a lot of different things. And so I've had to be able to say, is this okay? Because I want to all the time, always, you know. And I've had to do that. And so for me, the Lord is teaching me that sometimes your heart's, you're always in the right place, but it's not the right time. So I've been doing that and asking, not all the time, I mean, you know, but if it's a questionable time, I'll say, Jeff, you know, what do you think? And he'll give me wisdom on it, and it's worked out really well. And it's funny because then later on he'll say, you need to go back and take that call or make that call or something like that. So it's been a good thing for me to pull back and do that. And then trying to meditate and pray before getting out of bed to start my day. Just even taking that 5 minutes, like before I even open my eyes or you know, when I just kind of get myself awake, because I am such a get up and go, you know, as soon as I wake up, I just go. And I've been trying to take that time before I even get up. Lord, help me with this day. You know what needs to be done today. You know what is going to happen today. You know what temptation I'm going to come up against, and just help prepare my mind for that. And I think that is, I know, of course, that's not the Sabbath, is how they dedicated it back then. But the principle, what the Lord is wanting to teach us, is the principle of the Sabbath, to take that moment, whether it be 5 minutes, whether it be a whole day, but to stop and consider what He wants us to do, to consider who He is. I think that's what He's trying to say, is the principle of stopping and allowing Him to have the say over what we choose to do and what we don't choose to do. I think we can put this in principle even in our decisions of our activities with our kids. You know, Lord, is there any reason why we shouldn't do that this year? Is there any reason why we need to stop it? Is there anything that, you know, this could actually, something that I can't foresee that this wouldn't be good for our family and things like that? And He wants us to do that. It can be that way in our physical, well, okay, I'm jumping ahead, so we'll just stop at that. But so there are some very specific ways. So if you didn't think of any specific ways, maybe what we've talked about here, or maybe there's some other things the Lord will show you, I know, Candy, you said that you were going on your lunch out to
Over the
the park, Fort Massac, when she has lunch. That's a great way to stop and just refuel, you know. So whatever you need to do, and even ask the Lord, Lord, show me some ways to pause, to stop, something that I need to do to keep my focus on you and to get me re-energized, and to make wise decisions. So I hope you circled what you could find yourself saying the most often. And you know, and I know there's a balance here, saying I can't or saying I can. There's pros and cons of both. But do you find yourself saying more often I can't or I can? And then out of that, I hope that you really thought through, why is it that I'm saying I can't more often than I am saying I can? And what are the things that I'm saying I can't to or I can to? So I hope this got you just really thinking again about your decision making and your schedules and things like that, so that you can just really assess those instead of it being almost a knee-jerk reflex when someone asks you something, you just automatically think, okay, yeah, sure, you know, or no, I can't. That you'll say, you know what, let me think about it. And you will. You'll take that moment, and whether it be that day, that afternoon, that night, the next day, and get back with them and let them know, you know, I think I can, or, well, I don't think I can. But we need to really be careful because, like we said in the very beginning, if we fill ourselves up with so much that when the Lord presents an opportunity or something that we can serve Him in some way, fashion, or form, if we're overwhelmed or if we got too much going on, we're all not going to go, no way, and miss out on something that God has for us. So I hope this is helping you see that. Do you find yourself feeling burdened by the demands of your schedule? And again, this is all just kind of tying in. You're really just stopping and thinking about your schedule in your life and thinking through that. So define yoke. Anybody? You want to say bondage? Bondage.
She
I have more than that, though. I do have more than that.
Go ahead and tell me what else it is.
Okay. Severe bondage.
You can tell her schedule was really allowing her nothing but bondage.
It was. The past month has been bondage. Okay. Affliction and subjection.
Okay. Anyone else other than bondage?
I had to attach with or to something.
Ooh.
What was that one?
To attach with. Or
Okay, so that is the
Like
reason
to
why
yoke.
that is because that was the actual noun. You had the idea of a yoke was back in the biblical times. It was actually a physical piece that would go on two animals or more than one animal for the purpose of working together and getting a job done. So attaching and working together is talking about, and that's why the Lord says, do not be unequally yoked. And what that's talking about, and of course we always take that, I'm going on a tangent here, but we normally take that in marriage. Well, really it's also talking about partnership. It's talking about even best friend, what you're yoking yourself to another person that you're saying, I'm going to do life with you. Whether it be in a marriage, whether it be in a friendship, whether it be in a business partnership. So the idea there of yoking is from attaching yourself to something or someone. So the yoke that we're talking about here is more the slavery yoke. It's more the bondage. Yeah, is the bondage. Yes, yeah. I looked at Blue Letter Bible, and the actual word for yoke was troublesome law imposed on one. So it's a troublesome law imposed on one. Where would we get the troublesome laws from? Where do you think that came from? In the Bible, I'm saying, you know, the troublesome laws. Can we think about the troublesome laws in the biblical times? How many laws did the Pharisees have, approximately? Is anybody? I think it was over 600. Would you think that was troublesome? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I also read too, it said like, you know, when you yoke the oxen, like they had to work.
Yes.
So that was like, it was talking about that.
Yes,
It was a
work.
bad.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a negative connotation for sure. Yes. That the idea that when you're yoking together, it is the idea of work. So, yes. Write Galatians 5:1. Can someone read that, please?
It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery.
Okay. So the Galatians 5:1, as I wrote down below, Paul was encouraging the Israelites to walk in the freedom that Christ had given them instead of trying to earn their salvation through works. So when he was talking about that freedom, he was talking because they were trying to earn their salvation. It was so hard for them because they had been under these laws that we were talking about. All they had seen their whole life was law. And now all of a sudden, this whole paradigm shift that I'm free, it's based upon just a gift, not me, and working and things like that. So we don't grasp it. It's hard for us to truly understand what this was to them, an absolute 180 in their shift of thinking of what they had grown in, up into all their life. So in the same way, we can do that even in our own life. We can be saved and yet be working out, doing things, trying to earn God's approval. So, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. So is there anything in our life that we're putting a yoke upon ourselves, thinking we've got to do this to earn God's approval? So the purpose, it says, is there anything that you are doing or thinking you should do to try and earn God's approval? So that really is coming from compulsion or obligation. Those words right there is, I have to do it. Thinking you're doing it because you have to. That's compulsion, obligation, versus approval, your consent, and agreement. And really what it boils down to, is this something I have to do rather than I want to do? Christ did set us free from our salvation, but he also set us free from having to do anything to gain his approval. Honestly, there's nothing else that you have to do other than receiving him to be in right standing with him. That's hard even for us. And we didn't grow up in that idea that we had to keep 600, 700 laws, It's still hard for us to think, I need to be doing more for God. I need to be doing more. Am I the only one who's ever thought that? We constantly fight that. And it's a good thing. Again, it's a good thing because we want to be pleasing him. The Lord tells us in Scripture, find out what pleases the Lord. Again, there's a balance. So what we're having to do here is really analyze our own life and seeing, why am I doing the things I'm doing? Is it because I want to earn his approval or because I really want to? So I hope again that you were able to analyze and think through that. Okay, the next page, this is where we're going to really dig into our memory verse. Matthew 11:28 through 30, and our verse for the week. So, a yoke and burden describes slavery, bondage, and being oppressed. But before we talk about what you thought that meant, I want to if you write these things down, I took the words out of our verse, and the first word was easy. I'm just going to be really honest with you. This is a verse that one of my kids really struggled with for a long, long time because of that word easy. When we think of easy, we think of, I don't have anything to do. It's just, there's just nothing. And actually that word easy in the Greek means manageable. Doesn't that put a different light on that word? So the word easy means manageable. So my yoke is manageable versus harsh, hard, sharp. And then my burden is light. Light means easy to be kept. So knowing what those words mean, and of course, thinking about what verses Matthew 11:28 through 30, and I think actually I wanted us to read that. Can someone read Matthew? Mike, you grab that? Matthew 11:28 through 30.
Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
So what do you think Jesus was meaning in verse 30? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. When we think about the context of the whole area that we just read there, what do you think he was meaning by that?
make them manageable
Yes.
for us to go through, or,
Your burdens mean your trials and things
Yes.
like that? Yes. Yeah. Anyone else? He definitely will do that. Gives us the ability to handle them. Especially like what you went through this week. I'm sure you actually had to do that this week.
I had a friend from college put this verse on Facebook today.
Yeah.
Just, and she's still in a lot with her dad, really sick right now. So that was
Yes. So the yoke that Jesus is talking about is his commands. So when Jesus talks about my yoke is easy, the yoke is really referring to his commands, the things that he asks us to do. So what are the things that Jesus, in the new, remember not the old, not the 600 plus laws, what are the new things Jesus asks us to do? Basically 2 things. Things we teach our kids and, all of our Sunday school. What are the 2 things? What are the things that Jesus said? And then what is the new covenant? What wraps up the new covenant? To love the Lord your God with all your heart and to love others. So when you think about when he said, my yoke is easy, he's saying, my yoke, which are his commands, to love him and to love others, are easy, are manageable. It is something that we can follow. That's not oppressive. His command to love him and to love others, it's not oppressive. It's not meant like the 600 or 700 laws were meant to just be absolutely impossible to follow. I mean, they were impossible. They could not be followed. And so Jesus says, I came to fulfill it. I've come to fulfill the law, not to abolish it, to fulfill it. Meaning, in him, he took away that law and said, now, the law that I tell you to follow is just to love me and to love others. It's very manageable. So when you now can read this, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And then he said, as you read, Candy, learn from me. When he said learn from me, he said, for I am gentle in spirit and I'm humble. So when we think about Jesus' characteristics, his attributes, we recognize he's gentle of spirit. So he said, learn from me. So the gentleness he's talking about and the humbleness he's talking about is when you know, actually I looked up the word humble, it's a blessed tranquility of your soul. It's a tranquilness, it's a peace of knowing that you're at peace with God. You're at peace with the Lord. You don't have to do anything else to please him. You don't have to do anything else to earn his approval. You don't have to do anything else for your salvation. That simply him being your Lord is enough. And out of that, he's asking you, now continue to love me and continue to love others. So don't